You know that feeling? That ice-cold dread that starts in the pit of your stomach and slowly spiders its way up your spine until your entire body is frozen? It's not a loud, screaming panic. It's a quiet, suffocating certainty that the world as you know it, the beautiful, stable, loving world you've painstakingly built piece by piece, is about to shatter into a million irreparable pieces. You're standing on a cliff's edge in your own home, and the person you trust most in the world is the one whose hand is hovering right behind your back. You can't prove it, not yet, but you can feel the air pressure change. You can feel the intent. That's where I was 6 months ago, standing in the middle of my perfect life, with my perfect wife, in our perfect home, and I had never felt more terrified or more alone in my entire existence. The worst part is, the final push doesn't come from them. It comes from you. The moment you decide to stop ignoring the whispers and finally seek out the truth, knowing, just knowing it's going to destroy you. This is the story of that moment. It's the story of how I stopped being a husband and became a detective in my own life. It's the story of how a simple, insignificant-looking phone charger became the black box recorder for the complete and utter crash of my marriage. And it's the story of how my wife, my beautiful, brilliant, beloved Amelia, didn't just get caught. She meticulously, arrogantly, and devastatingly exposed herself. Amelia and I were that couple. We were the ones our friends pointed to as proof that true love, that soulmate-level connection, actually existed. We met in college, a classic story. I was a quiet, focused architectural student, spending most of my time in the design studio covered in graphite and sawdust. She was a vibrant, passionate political science major, always organizing a rally, volunteering for a cause, her energy so bright it could light up a whole room. She saw something in me that I didn't even see in myself. She pulled me out of my shell, championed my dreams, and believed in me with a ferocity that was both humbling and intoxicating. We were inseparable. We got married a year after graduation. A small ceremony in the backyard of the first house we ever bought. A tiny, run-down bungalow that we poured all our love, sweat, and meager savings into. I started my own custom furniture business from the garage, and she began working for a high-profile environmental nonprofit downtown. For 12 years, life wasn't just good. It was a masterpiece we were painting together. We had shared dreams, inside jokes that could make us cry with laughter, and a deep, unspoken understanding of one another. Or so I thought. The change was subtle. So subtle that for months, I actively gaslit myself into believing it was all in my head. It started with her phone. This little black rectangle that had once been a shared portal for funny videos and scheduling our lives together became her private fortress. It was always angled away from me. It was always face down on the nightstand. It went with her to the bathroom, to the kitchen to get a glass of water, to the garage to get something from the car. If I walked into the room while she was texting, she'd lock the screen with a speed that was almost reflexive, a sudden, sharp little click that started to sound like a gunshot in the quiet of our home. I'd ask, "Who you texting?" And the answer was always breezy, casual, and just a little too vague. "Oh, just Sarah from work. Just a group chat about the fundraiser. Just my mom." But the smile never quite reached her eyes anymore. There was a flicker of something. Anxiety? Annoyance? It was a mask, and I was starting to see the edges of it peel away. Then came the late nights at the office. Amelia had always been dedicated to her job. Her boss, a charismatic, silver-tongued guy named Julian Vance, was a big deal in the nonprofit world. He was the kind of guy who gave TED Talks and was on a first-name basis with city council members. Amelia idolized him. "Julian is a force of nature, Ethan," she'd say, her eyes gleaming with admiration. "The work we're doing is going to change the world." I was proud of her. I supported her completely. So when the urgent late-night strategy sessions started, I didn't question it. When the last-minute weekend conferences popped up, I packed her bags and told her to go save the world. I'd stay home, work in my shop, and feel a pang of pride knowing my wife was out there making a difference. but the frequency increased. 2 nights a week became 3, then 4. The texts and calls when she was away became shorter, more perfunctory. I'd call to say goodnight and hear the clinking of glasses and laughter in the background. "Just a team dinner winding down," she'd explain. But there was a hollowness in her voice, a distance that 1,000 miles of telephone wire couldn't account for. The intimacy, the very bedrock of our marriage, was eroding under my feet, and I was just standing there, watching the tide go out and telling myself the ocean wasn't disappearing. The breaking point, the moment the denial shattered, was so mundane, so pathetically small. It was a Tuesday night. She'd come home late again, smelling faintly of wine and a cologne that wasn't mine. I was already in bed, pretending to be asleep. She slipped in beside me, her body careful not to touch mine. After a few minutes, she thought I was asleep, and she turned over, pulling out her phone. The screen cast a ghostly blue light on her face, and I saw her smile. It wasn't the smile she gave me anymore. It was a secret, private, girlish smile, full of a warmth and a joy that had been missing from our lives for months. She was texting, her thumbs flying across the screen. And then she brought the phone to her lips and kissed the screen. A tiny, almost imperceptible gesture in the dark. But for me, it was a nuclear bomb. In that moment, I knew. I didn't know who, or how, or for how long, but I knew my life as I knew it was over. The loving wife I shared a bed with was gone, replaced by a stranger who was living a secret life right next to me. The next few days were a blur of silent agony. I was a ghost in my own home. I'd watch her get ready for work, laughing at something on her phone, and the jealousy and rage that coiled in my gut was so intense it made me physically sick. But I couldn't confront her. Not yet. I had no proof, only a gut feeling and a collection of tiny, damning observations that she could easily explain away. I would be the crazy one, the jealous, controlling husband. I could hear her words already, dripping with feigned pity and indignation. "How could you accuse me of that, Ethan? After everything we've been through?" I knew I needed something concrete, something undeniable, something that would rip the mask off her face and force her to confront the ugly truth she was hiding. I spent hours online, my mind racing, diving into the darkest corners of the internet. Private investigators, GPS trackers, spyware. It all felt too complicated, too risky. And then I found it. It was so simple, so brilliant in its insidious design. A USB wall charger, the kind we all have a dozen of. It looked completely normal, but built into its plastic shell was a high-fidelity microphone, voice-activated, with 150 hours of recording time. It used a tiny, hidden SD card. It was perfect. It was diabolical. And ordering it was the easiest and hardest thing I've ever done. It felt like a betrayal of the man I used to be, the man who trusted his wife implicitly. But that man was already gone. He died the night she kissed her phone. Now, all that was left was a man who needed answers, no matter how much they were going to hurt. The package arrived 2 days later in a plain brown box. I held it in my hands. This tiny instrument of destruction. This was it. There was no going back. If you've ever felt that gut-wrenching suspicion, that feeling of being lost in your own life, if you want to follow me down this rabbit hole and see how a simple piece of plastic exposed a web of lies more tangled than I could have ever imagined, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. You're not just a viewer on this journey. You are now a witness. And trust me, you're going to want to see what happens next. Holding that small, white USB charger in my palm, I felt a profound sense of cognitive dissonance. It was an object of absolute banality. It was mundane, something you'd fish out of a junk drawer or pack in a suitcase without a second thought. Yet to me, it felt as heavy and as loaded as a handgun. This was the point of no return. As long as it stayed in the box, I could still pretend. I could still cling to the sliver of hope that I was wrong. that my mind was playing tricks on me, that I was a paranoid husband manufacturing a crisis out of thin air. The moment I plugged this thing into the wall, I was actively choosing to dynamite the foundations of my own life. I was inviting the monster in. I sat in my workshop for what felt like hours, just staring at it. My workshop has always been my sanctuary. It's a place of creation, of taking raw, chaotic materials like wood and giving them form, purpose, and beauty. I build things that are meant to last, things that are honest in their construction. And here I was, about to use a tool of deception and destruction in the most intimate space of my life. The irony was suffocating. I thought about all the years Amelia and I had built together. I pictured her face on our wedding day, the unadulterated joy in her eyes as she said her vows. I remembered the nights we stayed up until 3 a.m., painting the nursery for the baby we eventually lost, holding each other and crying, but feeling closer than ever in our shared grief. I remembered her holding my hand so tightly I thought she'd break my fingers when my father passed away. We had weathered storms. We had forged a bond in the fires of real life, with all its tragedies and triumphs. Was I really going to throw all of that away based on a gut feeling and a few secret smiles at a phone screen? The guilt was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest and making it hard to breathe. I was about to commit the ultimate violation of trust. I was about to spy on my own wife. The thought made me feel slimy, like a creature from the bottom of a pond. This wasn't me. I wasn't this person. But then, the other feeling would rise up to fight the guilt. The cold, sharp sting of betrayal. I'd remember the cologne. I'd remember the way her body tensed ever so slightly when I came up behind her and put my arms around her waist while she was on her laptop. I'd remember the hollow excuses and the sudden, unexplained errands on a Saturday afternoon. The love and the trust I was so afraid of violating. I had a horrifying suspicion that she had already violated it first. That she had already taken a sledgehammer to the beautiful thing we had built, and I was just the last one to find out. The trust was already broken. I was just looking for the evidence of it. This wasn't an act of aggression, I told myself. It was an act of self-preservation. I couldn't continue living in this foggy limbo, constantly questioning every word, every touch, every late night. I was losing my mind. The not knowing was the real poison. The truth, no matter how ugly, would be an antidote. It would be painful, yes, but it would also be clean. It would be real. That night, I made my move. Amelia was in the shower, the sound of the water and her off-key singing a painfully normal soundtrack to the most abnormal moment of my life. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. My hands were shaking so badly I was afraid I'd drop the device. The spot I had chosen was the outlet by her side of the bed, on the nightstand where she charged her phone every single night. It was perfect. It was the epicenter of her secret life. I walked into our bedroom, the room where we had shared our deepest vulnerabilities and dreams. It felt like trespassing. I knelt down, my knees cracking in the silence. The existing charger was a standard Apple one, white and square. The one in my hand was nearly identical. A casual glance would never spot the difference. I pulled her charger out of the wall. It felt warm to the touch. I wondered, was it warm from the electricity? Or was it still holding the residual heat from the secrets it was powering? I plugged the new one in. The click as the prongs slid into the socket sounded deafening in the quiet room. It was done. The trap was set. I stood up, my breath catching in my throat. For a moment, I just stared at it. This tiny white square, a silent, waiting ear planted in the heart of my marriage. I felt a wave of nausea so powerful I had to grip the edge of the nightstand to steady myself. What had I just done? Amelia came out of the bathroom wrapped in a towel, her hair turbaned in another, smelling of lavender soap. She smiled at me. "Hey, you. You're quiet tonight," she said, her voice soft. I had to force myself to breathe, to unclench my jaw. I manufactured a smile that felt like it was made of glass. Just tired. Long day in the shop. She came over and kissed my cheek. Her lips were soft, familiar, but the kiss felt like a lie. Every gesture, every word from her was now suspect, a potential performance for my benefit. The intimacy was a charade. As she went about her nightly routine, applying lotion, brushing her hair, she was completely oblivious to the tiny traitor waiting for her by the bed. Later, as she was getting into bed, she picked up her phone and her charging cable. "Oh, my phone's almost dead," she murmured. And without a second glance, she plugged the cable into the USB port of the recorder. It was in. The connection was made. My heart lurched. From that moment on, every sound in that room would be captured. Every sigh, every whisper, every late-night call. I had turned our sanctuary into a surveillance state. Lying there in the dark next to her, feigning sleep, I had never felt such a potent and toxic cocktail of emotions. Guilt, fear, justification, and a sick, desperate anticipation. The wait for the first recording, for the first piece of the puzzle, was going to be the purest form of torture I had ever known. The next 48 hours were the longest of my entire life. I existed in a state of suspended animation, a high-strung, paranoid wreck just going through the motions of a normal day. Every minute felt like an hour. Every buzz of my phone made my heart leap into my throat, thinking it was some kind of cosmic sign. At my workshop, I couldn't focus. I nearly took a chunk out of my thumb with a chisel because my mind was a million miles away, back in our bedroom, imagining what the little white box might be hearing. I was picturing scenarios, playing out conversations in my head. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe all it would record was the sound of her breathing, the rustle of sheets. Maybe a muffled podcast she fell asleep to. That was the best-case scenario, the one I desperately clung to. The thought that I might have done all this for nothing, that I might have violated our privacy for no reason, was terrifying. But the alternative, the thought that it might record exactly what I feared, was infinitely worse. I was caught in a classic catch, two of my own making. I had to act completely normal around Amelia, and it was the most difficult acting job of my life. I felt like a fraud. Every "I love you" I said felt like ash in my mouth. Every shared meal was filled with a tension only I could feel. She, on the other hand, was a study in serene normalcy. She talked about her day, about the upcoming fundraising gala, about Julian's brilliant new initiative to save the redwood forests. She mentioned his name so casually, so frequently, weaving it into the tapestry of our daily conversation as if he were just any other colleague. But now, his name was a trigger for me. Every time she said, "Julian," a cold knot of dread tightened in my stomach. Was she testing me? Was she so brazen, so confident in her deception that she could talk about her lover to her husband's face? Or was I the one who was sick, painting an innocent professional relationship with the ugly colors of my own jealousy? I was a mess of contradictions, my mind a battlefield of warring possibilities. The plan was to wait 2 full days before retrieving the SD card. I needed a decent sample size, a window of time large enough to capture something if there was something to be captured. The second night, a Thursday, she told me she had to work late again. "Julian needs the final proposal for the Atherton grant ready by tomorrow morning. It's a huge one for us. I'll probably be home after midnight. Don't wait up for me, okay?" She gave me a quick, perfunctory kiss on her way out the door, and the scent of her perfume, the one I bought her for our anniversary, hung in the air long after the door clicked shut. The house was silent, empty, and my mind went into overdrive. Was she really at the office, poring over grant proposals? Or was that a convenient, airtight alibi? The hours ticked by with agonizing slowness. I paced the house, tried to watch a movie, tried to read a book, but the words and images just swam before my eyes. All I could think about was that little white box, silently listening. Finally, around 1 a.m., I heard her car pull into the driveway. I scrambled back into bed and feigned sleep, my body rigid with tension. She came in, moving as quietly as possible, and got ready for bed in the dark. I listened to the familiar rhythm of her routine, my ears straining for any clue. A few minutes after she settled into bed, I heard the faint, telltale chime of her phone being plugged in. Good. The recorder was still in place. The next morning, I waited until she was in the shower to make the switch. My hands were slick with sweat. In a matter of seconds, I swapped the recorder with her original charger and pocketed the device. It felt hot, not from electricity, but from the secrets I was sure it now contained. I slipped the tiny micro SD card out of its hidden slot. It was so small. A tiny black speck of plastic that held the potential to either absolve my wife or utterly condemn her. I couldn't listen at home. I needed a neutral space, a place where I could react without fear of being discovered. I drove to my workshop, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. I felt like I was carrying a bomb. I went into my small office in the back, locked the door, and pulled the blinds. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I could feel it in my ears. I inserted the tiny SD card into an adapter and slid it into my laptop. My hands were trembling as I navigated to the file directory. There it was, a single large audio file. I put on my best noise-canceling headphones, the ones I use when I'm working with loud machinery. I wanted to hear every detail. I wanted total immersion in the truth, whatever it might be. I took a deep breath, held it, and clicked play. For the first few hours of the recording, it was nothing. The ambient sounds of the bedroom, the hum of the air conditioner, the distant wail of a siren, the muffled sounds of us talking before bed. My own voice sounded strange, distant. Then, hours of silence, just the faint sound of breathing. My hope began to flicker. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe this was all a terrible, paranoid mistake. I felt a wave of relief so intense it almost made me laugh. And then I heard it. It was around 11 p.m. on that first night. The sound of her phone vibrating on the nightstand. I heard her stir. A sleepy, muffled, "Hello?" And then a man's voice, low and intimate, on the other end. "Hey you. Did I wake you?" It wasn't a voice I recognized at first. But then Amelia spoke. And her voice. It was a voice I hadn't heard in years. It was soft, breathy, full of a yearning and an affection that was completely absent from our life. No, I was awake, just thinking about you." My blood ran cold. I felt the air leave my lungs. "I can't stop thinking about that kiss, Mia," the man's voice said. Mia. He called her Mia. Only I called her Mia. It was our name for her. A wave of possessive, primal rage washed over me. "Me neither," she whispered back into the phone. "Julian, I shouldn't be doing this. Julian." It was him, her boss, the force of nature, the world, changer, the man she talked about with such reverent admiration. The sound that escaped my lips was a strangled, guttural noise of pure agony. My world wasn't just cracking, it was being vaporized. They kept talking, whispering about their day, about a stolen moment in the parking garage after work. They talked about me. "Is he asleep?" Julian asked. "Yeah," she breathed. "He's right here. He has no idea." The casual cruelty of that statement struck me like a physical blow. I was he, an obstacle, a piece of furniture in the room while they lived their real, secret life. I ripped the headphones off, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I stumbled to the small bathroom in my office and wretched into the toilet, my body convulsing with the violent expulsion of 12 years of love and trust. The sound of their whispered sweet nothings echoed in my head. It was real. It was all real. And it was so much worse than I had ever imagined. After the initial, violent shockwave of the truth hit me, something strange happened. The gut-wrenching nausea and the white-hot rage didn't just disappear, but they receded, making way for an eerie, unnatural calm. It was the kind of calm you hear about in the eye of a hurricane. The world outside is chaos and destruction, But in that one small space, there is a terrifying stillness. I sat on the cold concrete floor of my workshop, the damning audio file silent on my laptop, and I felt my entire emotional system reboot. The part of my brain that loved and trusted Amelia, the part that would have jumped in front of a bus for her without a second thought, went dark. It was like a switch had been flipped. In its place, a different part of me came online, a colder, more analytical, more detached part. The woodworker, the architect, the man who thinks in terms of blueprints and stress points and structural integrity took over. My marriage wasn't a living, breathing thing anymore. It was a collapsed structure, and my new job was to conduct a forensic analysis of the wreckage. My first impulse, the purely emotional one, was to storm back home, to smash the laptop on the kitchen table in front of her, and to let the sound of her betrayal echo through the house as I screamed and raged and demanded to know why. I wanted to see her face crumble. I wanted her to feel a fraction of the pain that was currently eviscerating me. But the new, cold part of my brain held me back. What would that accomplish? It would give her the chance to cry, to apologize, to spin a story, to manipulate the narrative. She would make it about my anger, my invasion of her privacy. She was smart, and she was a brilliant performer I had just received, undeniable proof of that. A messy, emotional confrontation would give her power. It would make her a victim. And I was suddenly, fiercely determined not to let that happen. She had made her choices in secret. She had curated a false reality for me to live in. I decided, in that moment, that I would not give her the satisfaction of a simple explosion. No, I needed more. I needed the full picture. This wasn't just about a stolen kiss in a parking garage. This was about a sustained, calculated deception. This was a conspiracy that had been unfolding under my own roof. That first recording was just the tip of the iceberg. How deep did this go? How long had it been going on? What else were they hiding? The cold logic was undeniable. If I confronted her now, the flow of information would stop. The secret phone calls would end. They would switch to burner phones, to secret email accounts. They would become more careful, and I would be left with only a single, maddening piece of the puzzle. I realized, with a chilling clarity, that to truly understand the scope of her betrayal, I had to do the hardest thing imaginable. I had to go back home and pretend that I knew nothing. I had to become an actor in my own life, just as she had been. I had to play the part of the loving, oblivious husband while I gathered more intelligence. The thought was repulsive. It meant smiling when I wanted to scream. It meant letting her kiss me when her lips felt like poison. It meant lying next to her in bed, the warmth of her body a sickening reminder of her deception. It was a form of self-inflicted psychological torture, and I was going to embrace it. That evening, when I went home, was my first performance. I walked through the door, and she was in the kitchen, humming along to the radio as she chopped vegetables for dinner. She looked up and gave me that bright, familiar smile. "Hey, honey, how was your day?" she asked. 6 hours earlier, that smile would have been the best part of my day. Now, it looked like a grotesque mask. I could see the mechanics behind it, the muscles pulling her lips into a shape that no longer had any meaning. I took a breath and stepped into my role. "It was good," I said, my voice sounding surprisingly steady. "Finished the joinery on the Henderson bookshelf. It's looking really solid." I walked over, leaned in, and kissed her. It was like kissing a marble statue. I felt nothing but coldness. If she noticed my hesitation, the slight stiffness in my posture, she didn't show it. She just turned back to the cutting board, completely at ease. The sheer arrogance of it was breathtaking. She was so confident in her deception, so certain of my ignorance, that she could stand there, chopping onions for our dinner, while her secret life with Julian was a living, breathing entity between us. That night, I put the recorder back in the wall. It was part of the routine now. It felt less like a betrayal and more like a necessary tool of the trade. My trade was no longer woodworking. It was espionage. My new project was the complete and total deconstruction of Amelia Vance. Over the next week, I lived a double life. By day, I was Ethan, the devoted husband. I brought her coffee in the morning. I asked about her work. I listened intently as she talked about Julian and the nonprofit, all the while filing away every detail, every slip of the tongue, every inconsistency. I was a human data collection machine. At night, after she was asleep, I would retrieve the SD card and retreat to my workshop, which had now become my command center. With my headphones on, I would listen to the daily installments of my own destruction. And what I heard was a methodical, systematic dismantling of every memory I held dear. They talked every single night. Sometimes it was just for a few minutes. Sometimes it was for over an hour, whispered conversations in the dark while I was supposedly sleeping just inches away. I learned that the affair had started 6 months ago on a business trip to a conference in Chicago. I had helped her pack for that trip. I had driven her to the airport and kissed her goodbye, telling her to have a great time. I learned that the late nights at the office were almost always a lie. They were at his apartment, a chic downtown condo that she described in loving detail. I learned that they had nicknames for me: the Carpenter, the Saint. They spoke of me with a kind of pitying condescension, as if I were a sweet, simple-minded dog that was loyal but ultimately unintelligent and in the way. "He's just so stable," she said one night, and the way she said the word stable made it sound like an insult. "He's predictable. It's comfortable, I guess, but it's not alive. Not like with you, Julian." Every word was a fresh cut. I was not a person to them. I was a problem to be managed, an inconvenience. And the most chilling part was that there was no guilt in her voice. None. There was only excitement, thrill, and a cold, calculating pragmatism. This wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. This was a choice. This was her new life, and I was just an obsolete piece of her old one that she hadn't yet figured out how to discard. As the days bled into weeks, my nightly ritual of listening to the recordings became a grim addiction. Each new audio file was another dose of poison, yet I couldn't stop. I needed to know the full extent of the disease that had infected my life. The emotional shock had worn off, replaced by a kind of numb, procedural focus. I started taking notes, logging dates, times, and key phrases in a password-protected file on my computer. I was no longer just a passive listener. I was an archivist of my own marital demise. The conversations between Amelia and Julian continued to paint a sickeningly detailed picture of their affair. They critiqued movies they'd seen together, laughed about inside jokes I wasn't privy to, and planned their future trysts with the logistical precision of military strategists. They were building a world together, a vibrant, secret world, and they were using the rubble of my own to do it. I learned about their favorite restaurant, a little Italian place in a neighborhood I'd never even been to. I learned that he bought her jewelry, a delicate silver bracelet that I then noticed on her wrist a few days later. When I asked about it, she smiled breezily and said, "Oh, this? The girls at the office all chipped in and got it for me as a thank you for managing the gala auction. Sweet, right?" The lie was so smooth, so effortless. It was clear she had rehearsed it. She was living in a different reality, one where she was the hero of her own story, and every lie was just a necessary plot device. The arrogance was staggering. She wore the evidence of her affair on her own body, right in front of me, confident that her story would be enough to blind me. And the terrifying part was, a month ago, it would have been. A month ago, I would have thought it was a sweet gesture from her colleagues and felt a swell of pride for her. But now, that silver bracelet looked like a shackle, a brand marking her as belonging to another man. The turning point, the moment this whole sordid drama escalated from a personal betrayal to something far more sinister, came during a recording about 2 weeks into my surveillance. They were on the phone, their voices low and urgent. This conversation was different. It wasn't filled with flirtatious whispers or plans for a secret rendezvous. It was about money. Did you move the last 5? Julian asked, his voice sharp, all business. There was a pause, and then Amelia's voice, hesitant. I did. It's in the new account. But Julian, I'm getting nervous. That's a significant amount from the joint savings. Ethan's not an idiot. He might check the statements. My blood turned to ice. Joint savings. Our joint savings. The money we had been carefully putting away for 10 years. The money we were going to use for a down payment on a bigger house. A house with a real yard. The one we'd dreamed of starting a family in for real this time. He won't check, Julian said, his voice oozing a confident dismissal that made my skin crawl. The carpenter is too busy in his little shop playing with his wood. He trusts you completely. That's the beauty of it. Just keep moving smaller amounts every few weeks. By the time he ever notices anything, it'll be too late. Too late for what? What were they planning? The conversation continued, and the pieces started to click into place with horrifying clarity. Amelia had opened a separate bank account in her name only, and she had been systematically siphoning money from our shared life savings into it. It wasn't just a few $100s here and there. Based on what they were saying, it was tens of thousands of dollars. The betrayal was no longer just emotional and physical. It was financial. This was a premeditated, calculated theft. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a cold, hard business transaction. They weren't just cheating on me. They were robbing me. They were using the money I had worked my fingers to the bone for the long hours, the weekend projects, the sacrifices to fund their new life together. The rage that filled me was a different kind of rage. It was pure, white-hot, and stripped of any heartbreak. The heartbreak was for the man I thought I married. This was about the woman she had become. A common thief, a grifter hiding behind a veneer of charity work and social justice. The next morning, I felt a grim sense of purpose. I waited until she left for work, her parting, "I love you, have a good day," sounding like a sick joke. I went to my office, my hands steady now, my mind clear. I logged into our online banking portal. My heart was pounding, but it was the pounding of a warrior heading into battle, not a victim bracing for impact. I opened the statement for our joint savings account, and there it was, a series of transfers, all to an account I didn't recognize. $5,000 here, $3,000 there, another $5,000 just last week. It was all disguised with vague descriptions like investment transfer or personal savings allocation. They were clever, designed to look like boring, responsible financial management. In total, she had moved over $40,000. $40,000. The number just hung there on the screen, mocking me. That was the down payment. That was our future. She had stolen our future. I leaned back in my chair, the air knocked out of me. It all made sense now. The secrecy, the meticulous planning. This wasn't just an affair, it was an exit strategy. She wasn't just cheating on me. She was methodically dismantling our life together and selling it for parts, all while smiling in my face and sleeping in my bed. The level of premeditation was sociopathic. She had been planning this for months, playing the long game, waiting for the right moment to pull the ripcord and float away on a golden parachute that I had paid for. The sadness I had felt was completely burned away, cauterized by the sheer, unmitigated audacity of her greed. I was done gathering intelligence. I had the who, the what, the where, the when, and now, the most damning part of all, the why. It was never about love or passion or finding her soulmate. It was a heist, and I was the mark. It was time to stop playing defense. It was time to plan my attack. Confrontation was coming, and it was going to be on my terms, in my time, and it was going to be a complete and utter demolition. The discovery of the financial betrayal changed the entire game. My mission was no longer simply to expose an affair. It was to protect myself from a predator. The $40,000 was a tangible, quantifiable crime that elevated this beyond a simple matter of the heart. This was now a matter of law, of assets, of my future solvency. I spent the next 2 days in a cold, calculated state of preparation. The emotional pain was still there, a constant, dull ache deep in my chest, but I compartmentalized it. I had a job to do, and I couldn't afford to let grief or rage cloud my judgment. I contacted a lawyer, not just any lawyer, but the most ruthless, shark-like divorce attorney I could find. A man whose online reviews all used words like savage and relentless. I had an initial consultation over the phone, laying out the basic facts without revealing my surveillance methods just yet. He gave me clear instructions. Do not confront her. Do not let her know you know anything. And, most importantly, gather as much documentation as you possibly can. So, I gathered. I printed out the bank statements, highlighting every single unauthorized transfer. I created a timeline, cross-referencing the dates of the transfers with her late nights at the office and the content of the recordings. I created a spreadsheet. It was the work of a man possessed. I was building a case against my own wife, constructing a fortress of evidence around myself, brick by painful brick. Each printed statement, each saved audio file, was another layer of protection. This wasn't about revenge anymore. Not entirely. It was about survival. She and Julian had a plan to leave me with nothing, and I was now formulating a counter-strategy to ensure they were the ones left with the consequences of their actions. I decided the confrontation had to happen in 2 phases. Phase 1 would be a test. I would approach the situation from the financial angle only. I wanted to give her the rope. I wanted to see her lie directly to my face, to watch her squirm and obfuscate and gaslight me about the missing money. I needed to see just how deep her capacity for deception went when she was put on the spot. Phase 2 would be the checkmate. I chose a Sunday evening. Sundays were always our quiet nights, a time we usually spent curled up on the couch, a peaceful end to the weekend. The tranquility of the setting would provide a stark, brutal contrast to the ugliness of the conversation I was about to initiate. I made dinner, just as I always did. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table I had built with my own 2 hands from reclaimed oak, a table where we had hosted countless dinner parties, celebrated birthdays, and made plans for our future. The sheer weight of the history in that room was crushing. I waited until we were finished eating. She was telling a story about some ridiculous donor at the nonprofit, laughing as she spoke. I just watched her, studying her face, trying to find a flicker of the woman I had married. I found nothing. She was a stranger, and it was time to meet her for the first time. I let her finish her story, let the laughter die down. Then, in the silence, I spoke, keeping my voice calm, almost detached. Hey, I was looking over our finances today. Her smile didn't vanish, but it tightened at the edges. A flicker of something caution, perhaps passed through her eyes. Oh yeah? Everything okay? She asked, her tone still light, but a little too forced. For the most part, I said, leaning back in my chair, deliberately adopting a casual posture. I was looking at the long-term savings account, the one for the house down payment, and I saw a few transfers I didn't recognize. A series of them, actually, to an account I've never seen before. It looks like about $40,000 is gone. I watched her face. It was a masterclass in subtle emotional shifts. First, a flash of pure, undiluted panic. Her eyes widened for just a fraction of a second. Then, it was gone, replaced by a mask of thoughtful confusion. She tilted her head, a gesture I once found endearing. Now I saw it for the calculated performance it was. 40,000? She said, her brow furrowed. That can't be right. Let me see. This was the moment. This was the precipice. She had a choice. She could confess, come clean, and we could deal with the fallout. Or she could double down on the lie. She chose the lie. I brought my laptop to the table and pulled up the bank statement. I turned it to face her. See? These transfers here. All to the same account number. She stared at the screen, feigning intense concentration. She was buying time, her mind clearly racing, constructing the narrative. Finally, she looked up at me, her expression a carefully crafted blend of relief and mild exasperation, as if explaining something to a simple-minded child. "Oh, that. Honey, you scared me. I should have told you I'm sorry. I was trying to be smart with our money." "Smart how?" I asked, my voice remaining level, betraying none of the seismic rage building inside me. "Well," she began, launching into a story so convoluted and absurd it was almost impressive. "Julian was telling me about this high-yield investment fund that one of the non-profits board members manages. It's completely safe, but the returns are incredible. Way better than the pathetic interest we're getting in that savings account. I was going to surprise you once the first big dividend came in. I opened a new account to put the money in there to keep it separate, to make it easier to track the growth. I was going to tell you all about it at our anniversary dinner." "Oh." She smiled, a proud, self-satisfied smile, as if she had just presented me with a winning lottery ticket. The lie was audacious. It was insulting. She thought I was that stupid. That I was the simple, predictable carpenter who wouldn't question a thing. She thought the mere mention of Julian's name in a professional context would be enough to allay any suspicion. It was the moment of truth, the moment she sealed her own fate. She wasn't just a cheater and a thief. She was a pathological liar who held me in such low esteem that she believed a fantasy about a secret investment fund would be enough to cover her tracks. I just stared at her, letting the silence hang in the air. I let her sit there in the glow of her magnificent, towering lie. I wanted her to feel confident in it. I wanted her to believe she had succeeded, because the fall from that height was going to be so much more devastating. "An investment fund," I repeated slowly, my voice flat. "Managed by one of Julian's board members. And you were going to surprise me." "Exactly," she said, her smile widening, relief washing over her face. She thought she was in the clear. "I'm sorry for not telling you. I just got so excited about the potential. We could have our down payment in half the time, Ethan." I nodded slowly, my eyes locked on hers. "I see," I said. And in that moment, she had no idea what I truly saw. I saw the whole rotten, corrupt truth of her. The test was complete. She had failed spectacularly. It was time for phase 2. The air in the kitchen was thick with her lies. Amelia was visibly relaxing, believing she had successfully navigated the crisis. She had spun her tale of a secret, high-yield investment fund. And she was watching me, expecting me to smile, to concede, to perhaps even apologize for my suspicion. She saw me as the simple, trusting husband, easily placated by a plausible-sounding story, especially one that involved making more money. She had fundamentally underestimated me, and that was the mistake that was going to cost her everything. I let the silence stretch for another few seconds, just long enough for it to become uncomfortable for her. I watched as her confident smile began to flicker, a hint of uncertainty creeping back into her eyes. She had expected me to fold, and I wasn't following her script. I leaned forward, placing my hands flat on the oak table. The wood felt cool and solid beneath my palms, a grounding force in the maelstrom of my life. "That's a good story, Amelia," I said, my voice dropping an octave, losing all of its previous calmness. It was cold now, hard. The sound of it made her flinch. "It's a really, really good story. Detailed. Plausible, even. You've clearly thought about it." Her face tensed. "What do you mean, a story?" "Ethan, it's the truth." The indignation in her voice was a performance, but the fear behind it was real. She knew something was wrong. "No," I said, shaking my head slowly, never breaking eye contact. "It's not. Let me tell you another story. A true one. It's about a man named Julian and a woman named Mia. And it's about late-night phone calls when her husband is lying right next to her." The color drained from her face. I had never seen a human being turn so pale, so quickly. It was like all the blood had instantly evacuated her head. She opened her mouth to speak, but only a small, strangled gasp came out. She looked like a fish pulled from the water, her gills desperately trying to find oxygen in an environment that had suddenly become hostile. "It's a story about a business trip to Chicago 6 months ago," I continued, my voice a relentless, steady hammer, each word a nail in her coffin. "It's a story about a stolen kiss in a parking garage. It's about a silver bracelet that wasn't from the girls at the office. It's about how that husband, the man lying next to you, isn't your partner. He's just the carpenter, an obstacle, a sweet, simple-minded problem that needs to be managed until you can get what you want and move on." She was shaking her head, a frantic, jerky motion. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, but the words had no conviction. They were the last pathetic gasps of a dying lie. "Don't you?" I asked, and for the first time, I allowed the full depth of my rage and my pain to show on my face. "You think I'm stupid, Amelia. You and he both do. You think I'm just some predictable, stable fool who would never notice that his wife's heart had left our marriage months ago. You think I wouldn't notice that $40,000 our future had vanished from our savings. You concocted a fairy tale about an investment fund because you have zero respect for me. You think so little of me that you believed I would just smile and nod and accept it." Tears were welling in her eyes now. They weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of panic. The tears of a cornered animal. "Ethan, please. It's not what you think." "Oh, it's exactly what I think," I said, my voice rising. "But you know what? The most beautiful part of this whole ugly mess is that I don't have to think. I don't have to guess or assume or live with a gut feeling anymore. Because I know." And with that, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My hands were perfectly steady now. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind 100 times. I opened my audio files, the ones I had saved and labeled with dates and times. I selected a file from the night before, a particularly damning conversation where they had laughed about how easy it was to deceive me. I turned the volume all the way up and I pressed play. Her voice filled the kitchen. Her own voice, whispering and intimate, cooing Julian's name. "I can't wait to see you tomorrow," her recorded voice whispered from the phone speaker. Julian's voice replied, distorted but clear. "Me neither, Mia. Are you sure you can get away?" "Oh, please," the recording of Amelia said with a cruel little laugh. "I'll just tell Ethan we have an early board meeting. He won't even question it. He never does." I let the recording play, the sound of their secret intimacy, their shared contempt for me, echoing off the walls of the life we had built together. Amelia stared at the phone on the table as if it were a venomous snake. Her face completely crumbled. The mask of indignation, of confusion, of panic, it all dissolved into a grotesque mess of pure, unadulterated horror. The carefully constructed walls of her double life came crashing down in an instant. This was not an accusation she could deny. It was not a suspicion she could gaslight away. It was her own voice, her own words, her own betrayal, served up to her on a platter in the heart of our home. She let out a sound, a wretched, keening sob that came from the depths of her soul. She covered her face with her hands, her body shaking violently. It wasn't the sound of remorse. It was the sound of being caught, utterly, completely, and irrevocably caught. The game was over. I had won. But standing there, in the ruins of my life, listening to my wife's world collapse, I felt no victory. I just felt empty. The hurricane had passed, and all that was left was the devastating, silent wreckage. The aftermath of the revelation was a landscape of surreal, agonizing silence. The audio from my phone finished playing, leaving a void in the room that was filled only by Amelia's broken, shuddering sobs. She didn't try to explain. She didn't try to apologize. The evidence was too absolute, too condemning. There were no words left that could fix what she had broken. She just sat there, curled in on herself, a complete stranger at the table I had built. I watched her for a long moment, feeling a profound and chilling detachment. The woman I had loved, the woman I had spent 12 years of my life with, was gone. In her place was this wreckage of a person. I felt no pity. I felt no lingering love. I felt nothing but a vast, cold emptiness and a grim resolve to see this through to the end. "Pack a bag," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. It was a simple, direct order. "I want you out of this house tonight." She looked up at me, her face a mess of tears and mascara. "Ethan, please," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Please, we can talk about this. We can fix this." The absurdity of her words, the idea that this was something that could be fixed, was so staggering it almost made me laugh. "Fix this?" I repeated, my voice dripping with a contempt I didn't bother to hide. "Amelia, there is nothing left to fix. You didn't just make a mistake. You built an entirely separate life based on a foundation of lies. You stole from me. You conspired against me with your lover, in my own bed. You didn't break a promise, Amelia. You incinerated it. You burned our entire life to the ground for your own selfish thrill. There is no use to fix." Her face crumbled again, but I was unmoved. I had exhausted my supply of empathy for her. "Get your things," I said again, my tone leaving no room for argument. "I'm not going to sleep under the same roof as you for one more night. You can go to a hotel. You can go to Julian's. Frankly, I don't care where you go. But you are leaving." Something in my eyes, in the absolute finality of my voice, must have finally broken through her panicked denial. She seemed to understand that begging and crying were useless. The man who would have responded to those tears was gone. Slowly, shakily, she stood up and walked, almost like a zombie, towards my bedroom. I stayed in the kitchen, listening to the sounds of her packing, the opening and closing of drawers, the rustle of clothes. Each sound was a funeral dirge for our marriage. While she packed, I made my first official move. I took out my phone and sent a text to the lawyer, the one whose name I now had saved in my contacts. The message was simple. "She knows. I have her on tape admitting everything. We're moving forward. Call me tomorrow." An hour later, Amelia emerged from the bedroom with a single suitcase and her purse. She wouldn't look at me. She stood by the front door, a ghost in the house she had once filled with so much life. Her shoulders were slumped in defeat. "My car keys," she said, her voice a monotone whisper. I picked them up from the hook by the door and tossed them to her. She fumbled the catch. As she turned to leave, she paused, her hand on the doorknob. "The money," she started, her voice barely audible. "I was going to pay it back." I let out a short, harsh laugh. "Save it, Amelia. Save the lies for someone who might still believe them. You and I will communicate only through our lawyers from now on." And with that, she opened the door and walked out into the night, closing it softly behind her. The click of the latch was the final punctuation mark on 12 years of my life. The house was silent again. But this time, it was a different kind of silence. It wasn't the tense, anxious silence of suspicion. It was the clean, sterile silence of an amputation. A diseased limb had been removed. The surgery was brutal, but it was necessary for survival. I spent the rest of the night in a daze, walking through the empty rooms, touching the furniture, the picture frames, the artifacts of a life that was no longer real. It was an archaeological dig of my own heart. The next morning, my lawyer called. He was everything his reviews promised: sharp, aggressive, and completely unsentimental. I explained the entire situation, including the recordings. "Okay, listen to me carefully, Ethan," he said, his voice a rapid-fire burst of instructions. "The audio recordings are a gray area. In our state, we have two-party consent laws, so using them in court could be problematic. But that doesn't matter. We're not going to use them in court. We're going to use them as leverage. They are the ace up your sleeve." He laid out the strategy. We would file for divorce immediately, citing irreconcilable differences. But in the initial communication with her legal counsel, we would make it clear that we were in possession of incontrovertible proof of both adultery and financial malfeasance, including audio evidence. The goal wasn't to humiliate her in a public courtroom. It was to force her into a swift and favorable settlement out of court. No respectable lawyer would want to take a case to trial when their client was on tape confessing to a conspiracy and mocking her husband. He also instructed me to immediately go to the bank. I was to close our joint accounts, move my half of the remaining funds into a new account in my name only, and put a freeze on all our shared credit cards. "You are no longer a financial partnership," he stated bluntly. "You are now adversaries in a legal dispute. Protect your assets, starting now." Following his instructions was empowering. It was a series of concrete, logical steps that I could take to regain control of my life. Going to the bank, signing the papers, speaking with the manager, it was all part of the process of untangling myself from her. With every signature, I felt a knot of anxiety loosening. I was building a firewall between my future and her destruction. Later that week, her lawyer contacted mine. The opening salvo had been fired. My lawyer informed hers that we were seeking a divorce where I retained the house, my business, and a full repayment of the $40,000 she had misappropriated. Her lawyer initially balked, suggesting a more equitable 50-over-50 split of all assets. That's when my lawyer played the ace. He didn't send the audio files. He simply sent an email with a short, time-stamped transcript of one of the conversations. The one where Amelia and Julian discussed the money, the secret account, and their contempt for the carpenter. The email ended with a simple sentence. "This is a brief sample of the extensive documentation we possess. We are confident we can reach a swift resolution that avoids further unpleasantness for all parties involved." The response was almost immediate. Her lawyer's tone changed completely. The fight went out of them. They knew they had no leverage. They knew that a public court battle would not only be a loss but a complete and utter humiliation for their client. The negotiations had just begun, but the outcome was already clear. I was going to get my life back. The divorce proceedings moved forward with an almost anticlimactic speed. Amelia's legal team, faced with the undeniable and deeply embarrassing evidence my lawyer had hinted at, folded like a cheap suit. There was no fight over the house, no argument about my business assets, and a signed agreement for her to repay the $40,000 she had stolen, structured as a lien against her future earnings. She wanted this to go away as quickly and quietly as possible, and I was more than happy to oblige. I had no interest in dragging her through the mud publicly. I just wanted what was mine. I wanted a clean break. I wanted to disinfect my life of her and Julian's influence. During this process, my lawyer, a man who left no stone unturned, hired a forensic accountant to go through our finances with a fine-tooth comb, just to ensure there were no other hidden accounts or stolen funds we had missed. It was a standard procedure, a due diligence measure. I expected it to be a formality, a simple confirmation of the $40,000 we already knew about. I was wrong. About a week into his investigation, the accountant called my lawyer, who then called me for an urgent meeting. "The accountant found something," my lawyer said over the phone, his voice tight. "It's unusual. You need to come in." I sat in his sterile, glass-walled conference room, my heart pounding with a familiar sense of dread. What else could there possibly be? The forensic accountant, a mild-mannered man named Mr. Chen, was there, and he had a stack of papers and charts in front of him. He explained his findings in a calm, methodical voice that did nothing to quell my rising anxiety. He had traced the $40,000 that Amelia had moved from our joint account into her secret one. But he didn't stop there. He had also, through legal means, subpoenaed the records for that secret account. And what he found was a whole new level of deception. "Miss Vance, your wife wasn't just moving money into this account," Mr. Chen explained, pointing to a complex flowchart. "She was also making regular, significant deposits from another source, and large sums of money were flowing out of this account to a number of shell corporations." He slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a list of deposits. They were large, Random amounts, $10,000, $15,000, $7,000, $500, all from wire transfers linked to LLCs with vague, meaningless names. But it was the outflow of money that was the real shocker. Large payments were being made to vendors for services that made no sense. For example, Mr. Chen said, "Here's a payment of $20,000 to a company called Global Print Solutions. And here's another for $15,000 to Event Horizon Logistics." My lawyer had done some preliminary digging. Global Print Solutions was a company registered to a P.O. box in Delaware with no public-facing website or business footprint. Event Horizon Logistics was the same. They were ghosts. The final piece of the puzzle, the final twist of the knife, was when Miss Chen showed me the signature card for Amelia's secret account. She wasn't the only signatory. There was a second name on the account, with full access to all the funds. Julian Vance. It all clicked into place in a sickening rush of clarity. This was never just about an affair. This was never just about stealing our savings. We had stumbled into something much bigger, much darker. The nonprofit, the world-saving environmental charity where Amelia and Julian worked, was a sham. I remembered the conversations I had overheard, the ones I had dismissed as boring work talk. They were always talking about vendors and donations and grant money. They weren't stealing from me because they were greedy lovers looking to fund a new life. They were stealing from me because they were professional criminals, and I was just a convenient, low-level source of cash flow. The money from our savings was likely seed money, or perhaps a slush fund to cover their tracks. The real crime, the big con, was the nonprofit itself. They were using their sterling public image, their impassioned speeches about saving the planet, as a cover for a massive embezzlement scheme. They were soliciting huge donations from wealthy philanthropists and city funds, then funneling that money through a network of fake vendor corporations, shell companies they controlled, and ultimately into their own pockets. The nonprofit wasn't a charity. It was a money laundering operation. And my wife, the passionate idealist who wanted to change the world, was a key player in a multi-million-dollar fraud. The personal betrayal was immense, but this was a betrayal on a societal level. They were preying on people's goodwill, on their desire to make the world a better place. The level of cynicism and criminality was breathtaking. My lawyer looked at me, his face grim. "Ethan, this is no longer a divorce case. This is a federal crime. We have a legal and ethical obligation to report this. What we have here is evidence of conspiracy, wire fraud, and embezzlement. This goes way beyond me. This is a matter for the district attorney." Suddenly, the little white charger, the tool I had used to uncover a simple, heartbreaking affair, had become the key that unlocked a massive criminal enterprise. The recordings took on a whole new meaning. The whispered conversations about the Atherton grant weren't about saving redwoods. They were about securing another massive payday. The late-night strategy sessions weren't about work. They were about cooking the books. The next steps were a blur. My lawyer made the call. We met with investigators from the DA's office. I turned over everything: the bank statements, Mr. Chen's report, and yes, the audio recordings. Given the context of a criminal investigation, the legal hurdles surrounding the recordings became less of an issue. They were now evidence in a felony fraud case. I sat with two stern-faced investigators, a man and a woman, and told them everything, from the first subtle suspicion to the discovery of the shell corporations. They listened intently, their faces unreadable. When I was done, the lead investigator looked at me and said, "Mr. Miller, you have no idea how big this island. We've had suspicions about Vance's organization for months, but we could never get a foothold. You just handed us the entire case on a silver platter." The final act of my marriage was not going to play out in a divorce court. It was going to play out in a criminal one. Amelia's betrayal was so much more profound than I could have ever imagined. She hadn't just cheated on me. She had made me an unwitting accomplice, a patsy whose life savings were used to grease the wheels of a criminal machine. The humiliation was absolute. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of something other than pain or anger. I felt like I was on the right side of justice, and I was going to watch it burn. The months that followed were a strange blend of public chaos and private healing. The news of the investigation into the nonprofit broke like a bombshell. It was the lead story on the local news for weeks. The headlines were sensational: charity heroes or criminal masterminds, and beloved environmental group a front for massive fraud scheme. The faces of Julian Vance and Amelia were plastered everywhere, their smiling, confident press photos now looking like mugshots. The public's reaction was one of shock and outrage. They had been duped by these two charismatic, eloquent people who had built an empire on lies. I watched it all unfold from a distance, a silent, anonymous figure in the background. My name was kept out of the press, my role as the source of the initial evidence sealed in the investigation files. For that, I was eternally grateful. I had endured enough personal humiliation. I had no desire to become a public spectacle. The federal case against Julian and Amelia was airtight. The evidence I had provided was the crack in the dam, and once the investigators applied pressure, the entire corrupt structure collapsed. They uncovered offshore accounts, fake invoices, and a trail of deceit that was staggering in its complexity. Faced with a mountain of evidence, both Julian and Amelia took plea deals to avoid a long, drawn-out trial. Julian, as the mastermind, received a sentence of 12 years in federal prison. Amelia, for her role as a key conspirator, was sentenced to 7. I remember seeing a photo of her leaving the courthouse after her sentencing. She looked like a ghost, thin, pale, her eyes hollow. The vibrant, passionate woman I had once loved was completely gone, replaced by a convicted felon. I felt a brief, fleeting pang of something not love, not pity, but perhaps a sad recognition of the immense waste of it all. She had so much potential, so much charisma, and she had used it all to destroy herself and others. While their world was publicly imploding, I was quietly, painstakingly rebuilding mine. The first thing I did after she left was to reclaim my space. I went through the house, room by room, and purged it of her memory. I packed up her clothes, her books, her pictures, and donated them all. It was a cathartic, cleansing process. I rearranged the furniture. I repainted the bedroom a different color. I wanted to erase the ghost of the life we had shared, not out of spite, but out of a need for a fresh start. My house was no longer a crime scene. It was my sanctuary again. The workshop became my salvation. I poured all my grief, my anger, and my confusion into my work. I worked with my hands until they were raw, sanding, cutting, and shaping wood. There was an honesty in it, a satisfying simplicity that stood in stark contrast to the complex web of lies I had escaped. I created pieces of furniture that were strong, beautiful, and true. And in creating them, I felt like I was creating a new version of myself. My business, which had always been a passion, began to thrive. My new work had a depth and an emotional resonance it had lacked before. I think the pain I had endured found its way into the grain of the wood, and people responded to it. Healing is not a linear process. There were good days, and there were terrible days. There were days I felt strong and empowered, proud of the man I had become, the man who had fought back, and there were days I felt a crushing loneliness, a profound sadness for the 12 years I had lost, for the future I had believed in. I went to therapy, something I never would have considered before. Talking about it, saying the ugliest parts out loud to a neutral third party, was incredibly freeing. It helped me understand that what happened was not my fault. I was not a fool for trusting my wife. The blame lay solely with her and her choices. I learned to separate the woman I had married from the criminal she had become. It allowed me to grieve the loss of the former without being consumed by the betrayal of the latter. Slowly, gradually, life began to feel normal again. The constant tension in my shoulders eased. I started sleeping through the night. I reconnected with friends I had inadvertently neglected during the slow-motion collapse of my marriage. I found joy in simple things again. A morning coffee in my quiet house, the smell of fresh cut lumber, a long conversation with an old friend. I was learning to be alone again, and discovering that I wasn't just surviving it, I was enjoying it. I was rediscovering myself, Ethan Miller, not as a husband, but as an individual. It's been over a year now since that night I played the recording in the kitchen. The house is quiet, but it's a peaceful quiet. My lawyer ensured I was fully repaid the $40,000 from the frozen assets in Amelia's secret account before the government seized the rest. It sits in a new savings account, a fund for a future I haven't designed yet. The little white Charger is gone. I took it out to a field one day and smashed it to pieces with a hammer. It had served its purpose, but it was a symbol of a time in my life I never wanted to revisit. The truth can set you free, but sometimes the tools you use to find it are things you need to leave behind. I don't know what the future holds. I'm not sure if I'll ever trust someone enough to get married again. The scars are deep, but I'm not bitter. I'm not broken. I'm stronger. I'm wiser. And I'm free. I survived the collapse of my world, and I'm standing here, in the rubble, ready to build something new, something better, something honest. And this time, I'll be the sole architect. Thank you for listening to my story.